Rain hammered the windshield as the bus barreled down the dark highway at 55 miles per hour. The asphalt glistened under the headlights, slick and black like spilled ink stretching into the night. Inside the cabin, the hum of the engine mingled with the faint scent of diesel, and a cold draft slipped through a half-broken vent, brushing over passengers' shoulders. Most were lost in sleep or whispered conversations, but one woman sat upright, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles were white, eyes fixed on the streaks of water racing past the window. Her name was Clara, early 30s, a woman whose worn boots and simple clothes belied a strength forged in years of hardship. Her face was tired, lined with worry, yet there was a spark in her dark eyes that refused to be extinguished, a sharp, watchful edge that marked her as someone who had survived what most could not imagine. Tonight, that resilience was about to be tested in ways she could never have prepared for. The phone buzzed violently in her hand, a sudden intrusion in the quiet rhythm of the bus. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. Instinctively, she hesitated, her heart thumping like a drum in her chest. With a cautious swipe, she answered. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate, and chillingly precise. It's happening tonight. You can't stop it, but you can survive it. The words sliced through the cabin's monotony. For a heartbeat, the rattling seats, the soft hum of the engine, even the whispers of other passengers seemed to vanish, replaced by a tangible tension that clung to every inch of the bus. Clara's grip on the phone tightened. Outside, the rain blurred the world into shadows, trees flashing like specters past the fogged glass. Her mind raced. What was happening tonight? Who had called? And why her? Every instinct screamed to run, yet she knew the answers, and the danger lay ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon. Somewhere the night had already swallowed. Clara took a steadying breath, drawing in the damp, diesel-scented air, even as fear clawed at her. There was a stubborn ember of determination glowing within her. This night would change everything, and she would have to face it, alone, or risk losing more than she ever imagined. If you love tales of grit, redemption, and love that lasts, subscribe to Dust and Destiny now and ride with us to the very end. Clara's thumb hovered over the phone for a fraction of a second longer than she liked. The bus rattled on, tires hissing over wet pavement as the voice from the unknown number repeated, sharper this time. You don't have a choice, Clara. Tonight, it all comes back. A shiver ran down her spine. Her voice trembled as she answered, Who is this? What are you talking about? Silence, then a measured sigh. You know why. Don't pretend you don't. You can't run from it anymore. Around her, passengers shifted slightly, sensing something different, something heavy in the air. Nobody spoke, but eyes darted toward her, their quiet curiosity pressing like an invisible weight. The low hum of the engine, the patter of rain against the windows, even the creak of the bus floorboards, all seemed to fade as the conversation edged deeper into something personal, something unavoidable. Clara pressed the phone closer to her ear, drawing in a slow breath. She had been running in one way or another for years, running from the mistakes, the regrets, the unanswered questions that haunted her. But now, with the man's words slicing through the night like a whip, she felt the impossible truth. This wasn't about running anymore. It was about confronting, about facing what had been left unresolved. She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. I don't know what you expect me to do. You can't just... Her words caught in her throat. She realized she was shaking, not from fear alone, but from the adrenaline of having a choice laid bare before her. To hang up, retreat into the safety of ignorance and pretend none of it mattered, or to step forward into the unknown and meet whatever was waiting. The bus seemed to contract around her, every seat and every face pressing in as if holding her accountable. The man spoke again, his tone cold but precise. You've left things unfinished. You can run all you want, but tonight, the past doesn't wait. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the town she had left behind. The small streets, the smell of smoke from the chimneys, the creak of wooden porches under her boots. the eyes of people she had wronged or had wronged her. Every memory flickered through her mind like an old film, fleeting, sharp, unavoidable. Finally, she opened her eyes, determination settling like armor over her nerves. "Fine," she said, voice firmer now. "I'll be there, but know this, if anything happens to me—" Her words trailed, unfinished, because the weight of them said everything. The bus continued to hum along the rain-slicked road, but Clara felt a shift within her. She was no longer a passenger in her own life, drifting in the currents of circumstance. She had chosen, and choice, even under the shadow of fear, was a kind of freedom. From the seat across the aisle, a young man glanced at her with quiet respect, sensing the courage that others might have dismissed. Clara's eyes flicked briefly to the window, rain streaking down in silver rivulets. Somewhere ahead, the road wound toward what she had left unfinished, and she would meet it head-on. It was the beginning of a journey she hadn't wanted, but one she couldn't avoid. The unknown awaited, tangled with risk, memory, and perhaps in the darkness, a chance at redemption she had long denied herself. The bus's engine roared into the night, carrying her toward the inevitable. And Clara, gripping the phone like a lifeline, knew that this choice, shaky, terrifying, and wholly hers, was the first step toward reclaiming something she had almost lost forever: her courage, her voice, and her story. As the bus cut through the darkness, Clara leaned back, letting the rhythm of the tires and the occasional splash of rain against the asphalt pull her into memory. The city she had left behind came alive in her mind, every detail sharp and tinged with longing. She remembered the clang of trains late at night, echoing down narrow alleys where the shadows of brick buildings stretched long and thin. The air had always smelled of coal and smoke from the factories, thick and clinging, pressing itself into the lungs like a constant reminder that she had to keep moving, keep surviving. The apartments she had called home were tiny, crowded with the noise of families and strangers living side by side, their private lives spilling into one another like the smoke from their chimneys. She remembered nights when she would sit by the cracked window, staring at the glowing streetlights, imagining a life somewhere else, somewhere freer, somewhere less confined. And somewhere in that haze of steel and soot, she had met him, the man whose laughter had once filled her small world with warmth. He had been full of promises, the kind that felt like anchors in the chaos of her youth. Better pay, brighter streets, a shared dream that shimmered in the dim light of their cramped apartment. At first, the city had seemed like it was bending to their will, but slowly, silence seeped in. Love, once vivid and radiant, had dulled into quiet arguments, sharp words left unsaid, and evenings spent in separate rooms, hearts beating in isolation. The promises remained, but they were paper-thin, fragile against the storms that life kept sending their way. Eventually, the silence became unbearable, a wall she could not scale, and the separation inevitable. Clara's hands gripped the edge of her seat as the memories pressed forward, raw and unfiltered. She could hear again the metallic screech of the factory gates, smell the faint tang of rusted machinery, feel the loneliness in rooms too small to hide her dreams. She could taste the bitter coffee from the cafe she and he used to visit, where laughter had once come easily and then slowly faded. The city had shaped her, hardened her, but it had also taught her resilience, the kind that burns quietly, unseen, until circumstances demand it. Across the aisle, the passengers remained outwardly absorbed in their own worlds, but something in the way a young woman's eyes lingered on Clara for a heartbeat longer, or the old man's head tilted as if recognizing a familiar face, suggested that stories were being read without words. In the quiet of the bus, Clara's past became a current that others felt in fragments. A shiver, a look, a silent acknowledgement that life had carved and healed, punished and rewarded in equal measure. A subtle shift in the air made her glance toward a middle-aged man by the window. There was recognition in his gaze, faint but undeniable, as if the years had stretched a thin thread between them. Perhaps he had seen her before. Another city, another time, a fleeting moment when lives intersected briefly, then diverged. Fate, she realized, had a way of weaving connections through the most unexpected of paths. binding strangers in a quiet understanding that was more profound than any spoken word. Her reflection in the window blurred with the rain streaks outside, and for a moment, past and present merged. She saw herself not as the woman who had fled, nor solely as the one returning, but as a composite of both, scarred and resilient, cautious yet daring, lonely yet open to connection. Each memory that surfaced was a bridge, linking her old life with the journey she was now undertaking, reminding her why the choices of tonight mattered more than ever. The bus rolled on, its engine a steady heartbeat through the dark landscape, carrying Clara toward what awaited her, and the shadows of her past seemed to whisper warnings and encouragements in equal measure. The city streets, the trains, the promises unkept, and the silences shared. They all converged in this moment, teaching her that the stories we leave behind often return to us when we least expect it, demanding acknowledgement, resolution, and sometimes forgiveness. A faint smile brushed her lips. She could feel the invisible threads connecting her to the strangers around her, each person a witness in some small way to her reckoning, whether they knew it or not. And somewhere deep down, she sensed that the choices made years ago, the love lost, and the moments of courage left unspoken, were not yet finished with her. They would meet her fully and inevitably on the road ahead. The bus moved steadily through the rain, and Clara, eyes half closed, allowed herself to breathe with the rhythm of the journey, past and present entwined, and a quiet truth settled in her chest. Life had a way of circling back, and connection, whether brief or lasting, could be found in even the smallest, most fleeting recognition of another soul. The bus hummed steadily over the wet asphalt, tires slicing through puddles with soft splashes, a rhythm that seemed to mirror the beating of Clara's own heart. Rain traced erratic lines down the windows, blurring the outside world into a watercolor of headlights and shadows. Inside, the quiet murmurs of fellow passengers formed a muted background to the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Clara's hands rested lightly on her knees, fingers tapping the edge of her seat in an absent rhythm, as if the subtle percussion could guide her toward some inner clarity she had long avoided. For a long while, she said nothing aloud. Her voice remained trapped, curled around memories she had tucked into corners of her mind, too tender to release. But internally, the monologue had begun, soft, relentless, and intimate. She recounted the years spent balancing survival and motherhood, the nights stretching endlessly when she had no one to count on, the weight of decisions forced upon her by necessity rather than choice. She remembered the long stretches of isolation in apartments too small for her dreams, the crushing fatigue of jobs that drained her body while promising nothing but the faintest hope. She thought of the time she had been abandoned, left with only her courage and wits, a child's laughter in her memory, the sole light in otherwise pitch-dark streets. Her mind wandered to the day she had walked away. For years, that moment had haunted her, a whispering accusation that she had failed, that leaving had been an act of weakness. But now, on this bus cutting through endless miles of rain-slicked highway, she faced the truth she had long denied. Leaving had been survival. It had been the only way to preserve her dignity, her sanity, and the fragile hope that one day, life might bend differently for her. Her heart, taut with memories of sorrow and fear, loosened ever so slightly as she admitted this truth to herself. A soft cough broke her reverie. Clara glanced sideways to see an elderly woman seated across the aisle, a lined face framed by silver hair that caught the dim glow of the overhead light. The woman's eyes were keen, yet gentle, and she offered no words, no judgment, only the quiet acknowledgement of shared understanding. In that silent affirmation, Clara felt something shift, the unspoken validation that her struggles, her choices, and her scars were not marks of failure but evidence of endurance. The simple, wordless recognition carried a weight far greater than any verbal praise could have, and for the first time in years, she felt a measure of peace settle over her. Her gaze drifted back to the rain-smeared window, watching the streetlights stretch into long streaks as the bus pushed onward. She thought of all the nights she had spent second-guessing herself, wondering if she had done right by the child she had raised, questioning whether her decisions had been selfish or cruel. Yet now, Clarity emerged through the haze of memory and doubt. Survival had never been selfish. It had been an act of courage, and in that courage lay the foundation of all the love she had to give, the resilience that had carried her this far, and the dignity she now reclaimed. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to let the weight of guilt and fear drift away with the rain outside. The bus's steady engine, once just background noise, became a gentle companion, echoing the rhythm of her renewed resolve. Memories of abandonment, of endless struggle, of silent nights spent comforting herself and her child, now intertwined with a growing sense of self-worth. The revelation was subtle, like the first rays of dawn filtering through storm clouds. Quiet, persistent, undeniable. Clara's hands traced the edges of the small pendant she wore around her neck, a keepsake from the child she had raised alone. She turned it over, feeling the smooth metal beneath her fingertips, a tangible symbol of love, endurance, and choice. The pendant, much like the bus itself, had carried her through dark miles, through uncertainty, through the quiet storms of both city streets and heartbeats. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "I did what I had to do. I survived. I'm still standing." Across the aisle, the elderly woman's eyes glimmered with something tender, perhaps a memory of battles fought long ago or battles still ongoing, and in that glance, Clara recognized a bridge, a silent communion between souls who had weathered life's fiercest tests and emerged, if not unscathed, then unbroken. The moment stretched, unspoken, a quiet acknowledgement of resilience, a pact of understanding between strangers united briefly by the gravity of human experience. For the first time, Clara allowed a small smile, subtle but genuine, to form. Acceptance had arrived, not as a thunderous revelation, but as a gentle settling, a quiet affirmation that she could carry her past without letting it define the limits of her future. She leaned back, letting the rhythm of the bus, the sound of rain, and the warmth of silent understanding wash over her. For now, the storm outside matched the peace inside, and she embraced both with steady breath and open heart. Clara's fingers brushed against the small locket hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. It was a modest piece, tarnished slightly by years of travel and countless small collisions with the hard surfaces of life. Yet in its simplicity lay its quiet power. She had carried it for as long as she could remember, initially a token of memory, a talisman that reminded her of everything she had lost: her home, her fleeting relationships, the version of herself that had been naive enough to believe the world was always fair. Now, however, the locket felt different in her hand. It was no longer a relic of loss. It had transformed into a symbol of endurance. The photograph inside, a faded image of her child smiling, oblivious to the hardships both had endured, served as proof that she had survived, and more importantly, that she had preserved love through the storms. She traced the outline of the tiny face, letting her thumb follow the curve of the smile, and in that small motion, she acknowledged the countless miles she had walked, both literally and metaphorically, to arrive at this moment. The bus rolled steadily down the highway, tires hissing through puddles, and Clara allowed herself to breathe deeply, inhaling the faint scent of wet asphalt mixed with diesel fumes. The rhythmic hum of the engine became a metronome, matching the steady beat of her heart, which had once been jagged with fear and uncertainty. She realized then that healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about claiming it, shaping it into something that belonged to her alone. Each scar, each sleepless night, each decision made under duress, all contributed to the woman she had become. The locket, small as it was, sat in her palm like a quiet witness to her resilience. Across the aisle, the elderly woman who had silently affirmed Clara's worth nodded almost imperceptibly. There was no need for words. Understanding flowed in the space between them, a gentle acknowledgement that strength often manifests in subtle, almost invisible ways. Clara's story, once a source of shame and hesitation, had now been reframed as a narrative of courage and endurance. Every glance at the locket reminded her that she had navigated darkness and emerged intact, carrying her history with pride rather than hiding it behind silence. She closed the locket gently, letting it rest against her chest. The movement was both literal and symbolic, a gesture of protection, a claim to her own narrative. Clara had survived the long nights of anxiety, the relentless judgment of the world, and the quiet despair that comes when one feels unseen. And in that survival, she found a new sense of freedom. The freedom to embrace her story, with all its jagged edges and imperfect contours. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows with steady insistence. But within Clara, there was a profound stillness. The storm could rage as it pleased. It could carve gullies in the roads and obscure the view, yet it could not reach the core of what she carried. She understood now that true strength was not loud or boastful. It was quiet. It existed in the way she held the locket in her palm, in the way she breathed steadily, in the calm acceptance that life's trials did not define her, they refined her. Refined, a thought whispered in her mind, almost as if the narrator of her journey were speaking aloud. Strength isn't loud. It sits quietly in the palms of those who carry on. Clara let the words settle over her, a balm and a proclamation at once. She had carried on, she had endured, and she had begun to heal. As the bus continued down the dark highway, Clara's eyes lifted to the rain-streaked windows, catching the distant glow of streetlights reflected in puddles. The locket against her chest felt warm, almost alive, and she realized that she had finally reclaimed ownership of her story. The past had been hers all along, not something to hide from, but something to hold close, a testament to the courage that had carried her through every mile of uncertainty. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to imagine the life ahead, a life where survival transformed into purpose and endurance blossomed into hope. The bus slowed to a stop at a dimly lit rest area, the tires hissing softly against wet asphalt. Rain had paused briefly, leaving the scent of damp pine and gasoline heavy in the air. Clara's stomach tightened, not from the motion, but from the subtle shift in the atmosphere outside the windows. A figure leaned casually against the far wall of the parking lot, tall and solid, yet with a presence that immediately radiated tension. Her estranged husband, Marcus. She hadn't seen him in years, and the memory of every bruised conversation, every unspoken argument, every betrayal, all came rushing back in vivid detail. Passengers stirred uneasily. Some pretended to read, others stared out the window, sensing the shift in the air. Clara felt the same mix of dread and determination that had accompanied her through countless moments of uncertainty, but this was different. This was the embodiment of the life she had tried to leave behind, waiting for her with a past she could no longer ignore. She straightened in her seat, shoulders squared, the locket pressed gently against her chest, a reminder that she carried more than memories. She carried resilience. Her eyes met Marcus's across the wet asphalt, and she felt the old fear rise, then fall away as something steadier took its place. Clarity. She had survived storms before, and she could survive this one too. Marcus's voice cut through the night as he stepped closer, dripping from the rain that had begun again in a fine mist. "Clara, didn't expect to see you here. Or anywhere, really." His tone was sharp, edged with the familiar arrogance she had long since learned to read. "I didn't come here for an audience," Clara replied, her voice calm but firm, echoing slightly in the empty parking lot. She didn't flinch. She didn't stumble over her words. Every syllable carried the weight of years spent building herself back from the ground up. "You always were stubborn," Marcus said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Even when it nearly destroyed you." Clara's jaw tightened, but she refused to allow anger to dictate her response. Instead, she let a pause stretch, letting him realize that she had changed. "Stubborn enough to survive," she said, letting the words land between them like stones in a still pond. "And strong enough to walk away from what no longer serves me." A few passengers had crept to the windows, watching silently as the exchange unfolded. Their presence wasn't intrusive. It was grounding, a reminder that she wasn't alone in claiming her own power. Clara felt the same subtle acknowledgement she had experienced before, the unspoken solidarity that sometimes comes from strangers who recognize courage when they see it. Marcus's expression faltered slightly, though he quickly masked it with a shrug. "You think you're different now? that you've grown into someone who can just face me and not crumble?" Clara stepped down from the bus, letting the door close softly behind her. The rain coated her coat, but she didn't care. She wasn't fragile anymore. She faced him fully, letting the damp chill prick her skin without weakening her resolve. "I'm not here to prove anything to you," she said, taking deliberate steps toward him. "I'm here to prove it to myself." The confrontation grew sharper, words exchanged like blows. Memories of past arguments, taunts, accusations, silences that had once felt suffocating, collided with Clara's present strength. Yet she never resorted to violence. She didn't shout. She didn't strike. Her power lay in her poise, in the deliberate choices she made in every sentence. She chose clarity over confusion, truth over denial, and self-respect over submission. Marcus's posture shifted. He realized that the woman before him was no longer the one he had once tried to control. The tension in his shoulders spoke of recognition, grudging respect, and perhaps the first hint of fear that he had underestimated her. Clara noticed this, but she didn't linger in triumph. The encounter wasn't about victory over him. It was about asserting her autonomy, her refusal to bow to a shadow that had haunted her for years. Finally, she drew in a deep breath and let the rain fall on her face, washing away remnants of fear and doubt. "I have nothing more to say to you," she stated, her tone carrying finality. She turned, walking back to the bus with measured steps. Every movement declared her sovereignty over her story. Marcus remained, momentarily frozen in the mist, confronted not with defeat, but with the reality that Clara had become someone untouchable by the past's chains. The passengers greeted her with subtle nods and quiet smiles as she climbed back aboard. No one needed to speak. The air carried their acknowledgement. She had won a small, profound victory. Not reconciliation, not the rewriting of history, but the triumph of self-possession. She returned to her seat, her locket resting against her heart, and allowed herself a brief, private smile. The storm outside mirrored the turbulence she had just endured. Yet inside, a remarkable calm had settled. The bus began to roll again, its tires splashing through puddles, carrying Clara forward along the rain-slick highway. The confrontation was behind her, but its lesson was etched into her being. Confrontation need not destroy, it could illuminate. And sometimes the quiet act of standing your ground, refusing to yield to a past that no longer defined you, was the most powerful declaration of all. The bus hummed steadily along the rain-slick highway, tires sloshing through shallow puddles as Clara sank back into her seat. Her hands rested lightly on the small locket against her chest, feeling its reassuring weight. Around her, the other passengers were quiet, their presence a gentle acknowledgement of the ordeal she had just endured. It was not applause she sought, but recognition, and quietly she was beginning to feel it. From the seat across the aisle, a young woman, perhaps no older than 25, offered a tentative smile. She had been watching Clara, observing the courage it took to confront someone who had once held power over her. In that glance, Clara recognized a mirror of her own journey. The long nights of fear, the silent strength cultivated in corners where no one could see, the decisions that defined who she had become. No words were necessary. The affirmation was there in the eyes of a stranger who understood, who honored the quiet victory of claiming oneself. Outside, the storm had softened to a steady drizzle, and the sky was beginning to lighten as dawn approached. The oppressive weight of years spent in shame, blame, and self-doubt seemed to shift just a little, as if the bus itself were carrying her toward a different horizon. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, not from Marcus, not from the world. She was claiming moral justice, the recognition that her life, her choices, her survival mattered. The rhythmic sound of the engine and the gentle splash of tires over rainwater became a meditative backdrop, a quiet after-storm moment where every breath felt like a reclamation. Clara allowed herself a small exhale, feeling tension drain from her shoulders. The locket gleamed faintly in the first pale light, no longer a talisman of loss, but a symbol of endurance. She had lived through betrayal, heartbreak, and fear. She had emerged with dignity intact, unbowed by the expectations or cruelty of others. The bus slowed as it approached her stop, the familiar sights of her town appearing through the mist. Wooden storefronts, a diner with neon lights still flickering, and the sweet, crisp scent of morning air greeted her senses. She felt a thrill of anticipation. Freedom wasn't simply leaving a person or a place behind, but fully inhabiting the self she had fought so hard to protect. As she stepped down onto the pavement, the rain still falling lightly around her, Clara felt the culmination of justice, not in a courtroom, but in a profound moral truth. She was worthy, her story mattered, and no past wrong could diminish her value. She straightened her coat, clutched the locket, and walked with steady, unshakable steps into the new day. Every footfall was a testament to the quiet, enduring strength that had carried her through darkness into light. In that moment, the journey was no longer about confronting a past that had hurt her, but embracing a future she had earned. The bus rolled away, carrying with it echoes of the storm and the confrontation, leaving Clara to step fully into her reclaimed life. Clara stepped off the bus into the quiet night of the small town, the mist curling around street lamps and coating the sidewalks in a silver sheen. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys and the soft, sweet aroma of night-blooming flowers. In the distance, children laughed and called to each other, their voices carrying over the stillness like notes of a forgotten song. She paused for a moment, letting the world breathe around her, feeling the pulse of life continuing despite the storm she had endured. Her hands rested lightly on the locket at her chest, the talisman that had carried her through fear, loss, and confrontation. Tonight, it no longer felt like a token of grief, but a compass pointing toward the life she had fought for, the life she was finally stepping into on her own terms. Every scar, every heartbreak, every stolen moment of peace had led her to this very step, and she carried them not as burdens, but as proof of resilience. The town around her glimmered faintly in the mist, ordinary yet magical in its quiet promise. Clara's eyes lingered on the horizon where the first pale hints of dawn would soon touch the rooftops. Destiny, she realized, was not something that happened to you. It was something you claimed, moment by moment, through courage and persistence. The strength she had found within herself had been quietly growing all along, hidden in choices made in fear and perseverance. As she moved toward the warmly lit diner at the corner, the children's laughter echoing behind her, she knew that the past never truly disappears, but how we carry it defines the life we create. Survival, love, and dignity were not rewards. They were decisions, cultivated quietly in the moments when no one else was watching. She smiled, finally at peace, as the mist embraced her like a benediction. If stories like this stir your soul, subscribe now, share it with a friend, and tell us your thoughts in the comments.